What's up, YouTube? It's been a long time since I've done a commentary, but Rend needs a build guide, and this one turned out to be pretty fun. Got a bleed barb, pretty much face tank any boss so long as it's not miles ahead of you. Get big chunks on bosses, and you can basically just let them bleed out, walk away, let them die. You can basically face tank everything. Very rarely do you die with this character. Mapping gets a little bit slower. It's not quite as fast as something like whirlwind or one of the other skills on some of the other abilities, but it works well. It does a lot well. The bleed is nice because you can just put bleeds on everything and kind of run around and kite things, and everything will just bleed out and die. There's a lot of effects that can be added to bleeding enemies. Here's a little bit lower, stronghold boss, just standing in front of him, face tanking. It's really easy to max out your Fortify. Damage reduction's really high, just base damage reduction. Barb has 10% by default, I believe, so everything you stack on that is just a bonus. But let's get right into it. We'll just get right into the tree here. We use lunging strike to begin, and the reason is it's real good for chase. Depending on what you're using as your weapon, it might stun. There's multiple things you can do, but it allows you to kind of dash out of a group if you're just standing there tanking some things. So obviously you're required to take enhanced lunging strike, and we take combat lunging strike so that we can keep that berserking up longer. If you're low on crit, feel free to use the other option. But once your crit gets up a little higher, you want to stick with this. And for our main ability, we use Rend for our big bleeds, and Enhanced Rend and Violent Rend for all the perks that go towards vulnerability. Furious Rend is good. I used it early on when I was having trouble generating Fury, but once you get all your unique setup and all that kind of stuff, I recommend switching over to Violent Rend. And now we spec 3 points into pressure points, and this just helps us with gain vulnerability when using our core skills. And now we move into our cries, starting with rallying cry. Obviously we get our unstoppable, which is massive, and generate a chunk of fury. And next we move down to challenging shout, and this gives us a big damage reduction. You get a big chunk of life, and we gain fury as we are hit. I personally don't use thorns, so I don't think the other option is super viable. It might be on a build like this where you're so close to everything. I have not been taking advantage of thorns almost at all. Now we move down to Warcry, and this is our damage Warcry. Gives berserking for 4 seconds, and you gain 4 life as Fortify. So, if you want, that's kind of up to you. If you want the damage, take the damage. If you want the defense, take the defense. Either one is viable, just kind of depending on what you're looking for. Now we spec 3 points into Booming Voice to extend those durations of the shout, since we use triple shout. And then we're also going to use the life regen. This, again, you can take it or leave it. I personally like the regen while a shout is active, but you might find something that's more suitable. Maybe you want some damage or something else where you can respec these into. These are our berserking nodes. We get some damage reduction, and then also we get some fury generation while we're berserking. We have it up almost 100% of the time. Moving to Pit Fighter, this gives us some damage and some damage reduction, and No Mercy will give us some crit chance against slowed enemies, which you'll see we get from our next node. Hamstring, which just adds a slowing effect to bleeding enemies, so it's really easy, obviously, to apply bleed. You do not have to spec more than 3 points into it, or more than 1 point into it. You're more than welcome to if you want to slow things down for defensive purposes, but to take advantage, you only need to have 1 point spec'd into Hamstring. Now, Thick Skin, we just take the 1, get a little Fortify, but mainly we're using it to get over here to counter offensive. This gives us damage increase based on Fortify, and because it's so easy to cap out our Fortify, we basically have a consistent 12% damage increase. For our ult, we are going to be using Iron Maelstrom, gives us crit chance, and swapping weapons reduces the cooldown. And because we use 2 swords for our core skill, and we use an axe or a 2-handed sword for Rend, we're constantly switching weapons, which reduces our cooldown significantly and allows us to use our ult fairly often. For our last 3 passives, we spec 3 into heavy-handed just to get that crit strike damage with 2-handed weapons. For our major keystone, we take Gushing Wounds, which gives us basically what it does is your crit chance is the same chance that you have to apply your crit strike damage as bleeding damage. So if you have big crit, you can put massive bleeds onto things, and then obviously overpowering bleed explodes are obviously great. Moving to the Paragon, the default board, we're going to try to take as much dex as possible for the crit chance. For our rune or glyphs, excuse me, we take bleed damage per dex. And we have some physical damage and strength. Obviously, we're based on physical damage. Moving into the next node, we go up, rotate it at once, I think. Damage to bleeding enemies and elites. We're going to just take all rare, give a buff to rare nodes in radius, just because I didn't have much else. And moving left and up, we take damage to bleeding enemies and strength. Our unique passive, just another opportunity to gain berserking. Some more damage while berserking and berserking duration. Our next tree, again, we're focusing heavily on dex. Here we want vulnerability. It's another opportunity to gain it. We gain it from our core skill, and then here we have an 8% chance to make them vulnerable. Now moving over to the left, we'll get some more damage, some more physical damage. I stayed away from the damage reduction stuff for the most part. Willpower and dex, ideally, if you can. Some more damage. And then we do end up taking a damage reduction node here just because it's here, it's where I am. Eventually we'll head over to hemorrhage. But yeah, so this is where the Paragon lives now. It's been pretty good. Again, I didn't do a whole lot of damage reduction stuff because our Fortify generation is so good. And moving to the gear, we're pretty geared up for the most part. Amulet needs a little bit of work, but to start out, we're on the helmet. And we take some life on kill, some basic attack speed. We want a lot of attack speed. Cooldown reduction, that's one of the most important across the board. As much cooldown reduction as you can get, the better off you'll be. And then just total armor. Obviously, armor is just flat damage reduction. And then for our legendary line, I guess, whatever it is, modifier. After swapping 6 times, you gain 405 Fortify. We swap weapons so much that 405 just, it comes on quickly. The body armor now, we take +3 ranks to Rallying Cry, +3 ranks to Challenging Shout. +3 is great for your whatever your abilities you're using. Armor, and then just damage with 2-handed slashing weapons. Each point of Fury generated while at maximum Fury grants 13 Fortify. So that's another easy way to generate Fortify. You just, bonk something with your core skill a few times, generate Fury, and then it just starts every hit after you're at max Fury just generates more and more Fortify. And our gauntlets grant us +3 ranks to Rend, so that's huge damage, high crit chance. This one's not great, needs some work. All stats, that's great for the willpower and the dex, and strength is always good. Damaging an enemy with the core skill has up to a 22% chance to extend the duration of berserking. Again, we're focusing heavily on berserk. This allows us to keep it up almost 100% of the time, if not 100% of the time. Our pants have a fairly common legendary modifier, which is you gain 0.4% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage. This one's pretty good across the board. I think many builds would probably use this. And then we're taking damage reduction close enemies, dodge chance, whatever, that could go. Life's great, and then +4 ranks to Warcry. Obviously the +4 is great. And our gems, we're taking damage reduction while fortified. Obviously we are fortified all the time, so it's just a flat damage reduction. Our boots, most importantly, those +3 max evade charges. I personally don't want boots that don't have +2 evade charges. And then I just treated it essentially like you would path, movement speed, and some resists. You'd be okay with life. I also chose berserking duration, again for the same reason stated before. You know, let's keep the berserking up. And then direct damage against bleeding enemies has a 29% chance to stun. This happens fairly often, more often than you'd think, and it's really nice when it happens to a boss and it just lays on the ground and you can just put bleeds on it. What's great about the barb is you can have 4 weapons. You probably won't use all of them. Some of them will just be used as stat sticks, which is what this is for now. You can go with bludgeoning if you want to work in some more stuns and stuff like that. I didn't necessarily need the stuns anymore, so I don't use this. I really just use it for mainly that basic skills, gain 48% attack speed. That allows me to just whack things with lunging strike and gain a ton of fortify and put vulnerability and all that kind of stuff. And then you just want the standard stats. Damage to slowed, that's great because our bleeding enemies are slowing, bleeding enemies are bleeding, strength, and then basic skill damage, take it or leave it. So here's my little guy, take a look, a little rotate. And so now this axe, this is something that I'm trying out. I just recently dropped this, mainly for the lucky hit. When you critically strike an enemy, you have up to 100% chance to fear and slow them by 50% for 4 seconds. This is nice for the slow, but it's also nice when something runs away. Like for instance, maybe there's a summoner and you need to separate him from the pack, or there's some enemy of some kind you need to separate from the pack and just kill because they're throwing out effects or they're resummoning everything or whatever the case is. This has been really nice for that. It causes the enemy to just turn and run out of the pack. And then with lunging strike, you can chase them down or just not worry about it for a second or whatever the case may be. I didn't know if I was going to love this or not, but I have come to really like this. And I'm not sure how uniques work, to be honest. Again, coming from Path and not necessarily being a Diablo player, I don't know if the modifiers are set or not. But, you know, we've got physical damage, damage to crowd-controlled enemies, which anything crowd-controlled, that can be slow, stun, any of that. Critical strike damage, obviously great. And then critical strike chance against injured enemies. That's when I believe it's below 30% health. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And then we just take... damage over time for our jewels across the board. It seems to be the best form. It's better than fortified damage, all that kind of stuff. Moving to our other one-handed weapon, we have a sword. Originally, I did run 2 swords for the critical strike damage, but we want, so we have overpowered damage is whatever, strength is whatever, damage over time is great, and 38 stats is all great. And then attacking an enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill by 10%. So I use this to, again, you're whacking something with your lunging strike over and over and over, you're generating fortify, but you're also generating power for your next Rend. So what I'll try to do is whack something 3 times at least, and then Rend, and it'll put a 30% damage increase on your Rend. And for our big Rend weapon, we are using an axe. I think a sword is suitable as well, depending on your expertise. You know, I use the axe because I believe you gain the vulnerability. With the 2-handed sword, you get damage as additional bleeding, which is also nice. Kind of just depends. Maybe if you have a better sword, use a sword. If you have a better axe, use an axe. And then we have damage to close enemies. Ultimate skill damage is fine. Critical strike damage, great. Damage to bleeding enemies. And then skills deal up to 38% increased damage based on your available primary resource. And now again, because we are trying to max out Fortify, we often have a lot of Fury, so this allows for our Rends to hit even harder. For our jewelry, we go ahead and we want crit strike chance, crit strike damage, damage to slow, vulnerability damage is good. There are some of these are interchangeable. You know, what's great about this game is damage, so that works really nice. This your shout skills generate 2 to 4 fury per second while active. This is the aspect one you get from the dungeon, so it's the lowest roll, but this is nice because again you have your 3 shouts. You're constantly generating fury, right? So, and then on top of your berserking nodes, fury generation is really nice. For our other ring, this is arguably the most important legendary modifier for whenever you cast a shout. Your skill cooldown is released by 1.4 seconds per nearby enemy up to a maximum of 6. This is a find only legendary, so you can't, there's no dungeon or anything to get it, but this allows your you know, I believe we have 7.5 seconds active time for our war cries, and then, you know, typically with even only a handful of enemies nearby, you know, it'll drop your cooldown down to about 13 seconds. If there's a lot of enemies, it gets down to, you know, 8 or 9, so it gives you almost 100% uptime on your shouts. There may be some other modifiers you could find to lengthen that. Then again, damage to close enemies, fortification generation, just some defensive, critical strike chance, which is your critical strike chance and attack speed are your two most important modifiers for this particular build, in my opinion. You know, there might be, you know, that's what I focused on. Again, maybe that's the path mentality, you know, attack speed and crit, but it's worked out well so far. For the last piece of gear, move to the amulet, which is I would like to replace. It's pretty low. It's just a standard legendary amulet. Fury cost reduction, which is really nice. Cooldown reduction, again, damage reduction from close enemies and armor, so this is fairly defensive. And then again, critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by 26%. So this is another massive boost to attack speed when you're whacking away with your lunging strike. So lunging strike generates your fury, it generates attack speed, it adds damage bonus after you've struck something 3 times. So it's you're really using it not necessarily to do massive damage, but to apply massive damage with your Rend. So that's how this all functions. And just to get an idea of kind of what we're looking at, some of my stats here. You know, crit strike chance is at 32%, which is pretty high for a barb, I think. You know, 170% crit damage. So again, I have a 37% chance to apply 170% bleed. So now moving to the expertise, I use two-handed axe expertise for that vulnerable damage and increased crit strike against vulnerable enemies. Two-handed is great. It gives you that direct damage inflicting is extra bleed. One-handed it's okay. It's just that line of on injured enemies, because once an enemy's, what is it, 30% life, I believe. Once it's at 30%, it's, you know, what do I need higher crit chance and all that kind of stuff for to finish it out? You've already got them to 30%. Maybe if it was something more like a cull or something like that, I'd be more inclined. But yeah, so that's my expertise. I hope you all enjoyed the guide. If it was useful, let me know in the future. You know, I just do these for fun. If there's something you'd like to hear, maybe something I missed out, or even if, you know, you have an idea of maybe you're doing something similar, if you have something that would help me make this a little bit better or useful, or something I don't know about. Again, I'm a little newer to Diablo. I'm typically a Path player. I've been playing Path for 8 years now or so. You know, I've got multiple level 100s and headhunters and mage bloods and all that kind of stuff, but Diablo's new to me, so any help you guys have would also be great. And then again, this is just some gameplay, some mapping, just to get an idea of kind of how it looks. Yeah, so let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoy it, maybe I can do another one. Alright, take it easy, enjoy the last clip or two.
Out of fury. I need more time.